Before I can really begin this video's topic, I have to first start by explaining to you what research findings in cognitive science, studies in perception, and studies in experimental cognitive psychology have all sort of discovered about the human mind and how our brain learns and filters and interprets information. We typically learn by analogy. We like to learn things in terms of another thing that we already know about, that we've already have a good understanding of, a good grasp of. So we sort of like to learn by metaphorical examples and comparison. We like to compare and contrast one thing that we're just learning for the first time, something brand new, to another thing that we're very familiar with and already know. And with this sort of comparison and learning by example methodology or approach to learning, that's sort of how we sort of encode new information. We basically look at something brand new, and then we take that and we try to compare it to something that is something we're familiar with, something we already know about. And by using, as an analogy or a metaphor, example with something else that we know, and that's how we learn the new information. We basically learn new information by comparing it to old information, and that's sort of how we encode and learn and memorize, and how we develop an in-depth understanding of new information. And one thing that is sort of the biggest sort of fundamental concept in perception studies and experimental cognitive psychology and cognitive science, sort of like the biggest central theme in all of these cognitive science classes, is that the brain uses patterns. So that's basically like the main takeaway from all of my cognitive science classes, all of my perception studies and psychology and learning cognition. It's basically how our brain interprets and encodes and memorizes and stores and retrieves information. We encode it by learning it in terms of something else, by analogy, by example and metaphor. We learn new information by comparing it and contrasting it to old information, and then we determine and we sort of like decipher or analyze patterns and trends that information and things sort of tend to follow. So we try to find sort of like trends that things follow. We try to come up with theories and sort of like ideas that are sort of like a formula or like an equation that we can kind of make a sort of like inductive logical kind of inference, a general sort of principle or a general rule that we can then use to sort of apply to kind of general ideas, general understanding of sort of how the world works and how things work. And this is because there isn't in our brain, we've got trillions of neurons, hundreds of trillions of neurons, but there isn't a single neuron cell for every little fact of our world. And this is because it wouldn't be practical from an evolutionary perspective. It wouldn't make sense for our brains to have so much information clutter taking up so much of our sort of processing power, because it wouldn't be relevant to our survival and our success. It wouldn't be smart for our brains to take in every single detail and every single little fact around us, because that just wouldn't really make sense, basically. So now back to Minecraft. This sort of procedurally generated world built of these 8-bit looking blocky graphics is sort of this ultimate analogy to computational logical thinking. Because in Minecraft, the entire world, all of the environment, that the player is sort of as a first person, or you can change it to third person perspective, but most people play it as a, first person perspective. You basically, when you navigate the environment and the sort of like the world around you, all of the mountains and the trees and the ground and even the sky, even the clouds, it's all made of these blocks. And each of these little blocks are sort of like, it's sort of like correlating to bits or bytes of information. If you were to kind of stick with that sort of computer programming, kind of like that computational computer science analogy, all of the little blocks that the Minecraft world is made of is kind of like a byte of information. So when you put all these blocks together, it makes up these trees and mountains and the ground and the water and the sky and the clouds, and it makes up basically everything in the world around the person. It even makes up the person, because, you yourself, you're made up of blocks too. So it's kind of like this Lego block world that you basically kind of navigate, and you can kind of, you explore and you build and you break down materials and elements down, like you find iron ore, and you find, what else? You find coal, you can make charcoal out of getting you can break down trees into wood blocks, and then you can basically make you can put that in a furnace that the furnace you can build out of iron ore, and then you can basically take the wood blocks and make it charcoal, and then the charcoal you can use to you can make you could make iron ingots out of iron ore with charcoal, or you could go mine coal, and then you could use that as like the furnace to make other elements and other materials from sort of like these natural resources that are sort of in the form of these blocks that are sort of all around you in this Minecraft world. And this whole Minecraft world, it's procedurally generated. So every new game has a completely different randomly generated layout that it's based on some principles, so that the random generation layout doesn't break any serious rules or anything. But it's, for the most part, it follows pretty much how it's kind of like a natural simulation of our world. There's grass, there's ground underneath. Inside rocks you can find iron ore. There's trees, there's the sky, there's mountains. You can dig and mine into the mountains, and you can find caves and caverns, and you can find little villages with like village people inside this sort of like Minecraft world. But so Minecraft starts out as sort of like this simple kind of Lego building simulation game, but very quickly it kind of becomes this engineering simulated playground. It's kind of like a computer programmer's sandbox. It's this unconscious learning experience for how digital graphics and computational logic works. And the crazy thing that is so great about Minecraft is that all of this is in the form of this cute little kid's game, this little child's game. And there's no instructions, there's no tutorial mission. Really, this game doesn't have any missions at all. It's almost like you've got no guidance to this game. The game just throws you in this giant playground, this big world sandbox of little blocks that you can sort of make an analogy to computer programming and being like bits or bytes of information. And you can pretty much, almost everything you can kind of turn into a big metaphor for computer programming. Like, even at night when there's sort of those creepers, or like the Enderman that kind of like can look at you, and then you can like lose your game, and you can kind of, you have to start over. The creepers, when they come up to you and if they explode, it's almost like a computer software virus or something. So it's almost like everything in the game has some kind of real-world computer programming application to it, some kind of analogy that can be made. Which, honestly, this game, it's kind of like, it would be the best educational experience. If you wanted to give a kid an educational experience on a game, just I mean, this game doesn't feel like learning. It doesn't feel like you're giving them an education. It doesn't feel like they're learning any kind of, they don't feel like they're learning programming. They don't feel like they're learning about electronics and how electricity and circuits work. They're not going to think of it like that. And they're not going to think of learning about digital graphics and how that works, or how computational logic works. I mean, they're not going to be aware that they're in an engineering simulation game. They're going to just play the game like it's a game, and they're going to think of it as a video game. I mean, because it is a video game. And they're not going to think of it as anything else. They're just going to think of it as a game that they're playing and that they're enjoying and having fun. So it's basically like tricking a kid into learning with the video game. That's basically what Minecraft is.